Hi everybody, my name is Zach Soflin, and today I'm going to walk you through a guide on how to sync data from Layer to Power BI using the new Layer API. So we're actually going to be using this Layer project here called API Example, and we're going to sync this list of punch list issues to our Power BI and create a chart from that data. Okay, so in Power BI, we're first going to create a new data source to pull in our data from Layer. So I created a new Power BI document, and I'm going to click here to get data from another source. The source that we're going to choose is called Web. So I'm going to select Web and hit Connect. And now we need to enter the request information from the Layer API. So there's a few steps to this. First of all API calls to Layer's API are made to https api.layer.team. That's our base URL. Now, what we want to do is we actually want to get a list of all of the elements in this particular project. So you can find more in our API documentation on how to structure these requests, but we're going to be using the elements endpoint to call this data. So what we need in order to do that, we need a few different parts to our URL. First, I'm going to type a backslash, and I'm going to type projects. I'm going to type another backslash, and now we're going to enter essentially our project ID. I'll show you how we can find that ID in our browser URL. Okay, so if you look at your URL in your browser, you can navigate basically to the project you want to call data from, and you'll find the project ID listed here in the URL. So I'm going to copy this, and back in Power BI, I'm going to paste this ID into my URL. Now that we have the specific project mentioned, I'm going to type another backslash, and we're going to type elements. This means that we'll call the elements endpoint to get all of the elements from this project. But in my case, I actually want to narrow this request down to a specific category in my Layer project. Let's go back to that project and I'll show you which one. So you can see I have this category here called punch list issues, and this is where I want to pull my items from. So in order to do that, I need to specify in my API call the actual category ID as well. In the URL of your browser, you can find the category ID here after the word category. So we're going to copy this ID, and back in Power BI, I'm going to add this as a parameter to this URL. I could just edit all of it here in this text box, but since I'm running out of room, I'm going to add a second part to this URL down here. And basically, I just am going to continue typing my URL. I'm going to start by typing a question mark, which means that we're going to enter a URL parameter. And I'm going to type the parameter name of category ID, and then I'm going to type the character equals. This is where I will paste my category ID, and this will tell the endpoint that I want to get all the elements from this particular category. We're going to add one more part to our URL. I'm going to type the ampersand sign, and we're going to type in the word format equals simple. So what this does for us is it'll actually simplify the data coming back from the API for each element, so it's a little bit easier to work with in Power BI. Okay, we have our URL defined the way it needs to be. The last step before we actually make the call here is to add authorization to this call. Every endpoint that you call in Layer has to have authorization, and so we do this by adding a bearer token to any API call we make. So I'm going to click here under HTTP request headers, and I'm going to add in this box to the left the word authorization, and then I'm going to, in the box to the right, I'm going to type the word bearer space, and then I'm going to paste my API key into this box. I'll show you where we can find that API key. So back in our Layer project, I can find my API key by going back to my user dashboard up here, going over to the settings button and clicking on your account. You'll find a tab here called API, and if you click this open, it will reveal your API token that you can use for your call. So back in Power BI, all I have to do is paste my token after the word bearer and a space. So I'm going to paste it, and you'll see it takes up more of the text box, but should look similar to this. By the way, your token does come with inherent permission and access to access any project in your account. So be sure to keep this token safe and to not use it in publicly facing code. I'm going to hit OK. And we will hit connect. You'll see that it'll actually bring in your data into what's called the Power Query Editor. This will give you all of your data in a format that you can edit or apply steps to transform this data before you bring it into Power BI. So what you'll notice is that Power BI actually automatically applied a bunch of steps to transform my data in a way that it thought was helpful. Sometimes the result is good, but in this case, you'll notice that I have a bunch of columns where it expanded data that I didn't necessarily want it to expand. So I'm going to show you quickly how we can apply these steps manually by going back to the original source and kind of taking it from there. And I'm going to delete the rest of these automatically generated steps. Okay, now that all the applied steps are removed, we're back to just our source. And what I'm going to do is start by clicking on this item called list that's next to the word elements. This is basically my list of elements coming out of that category. And so once I click on that list, I'm going to click this button up here that says to table, and I'm going to hit OK. So this will now bring all of my records into the table, and each row represents a different item in my category. Now what I need to do is expand this column to all of the properties that are in each one of these particular items. So I'm going to click expand, and you'll see what it does is it loads a list of suggested columns. I'm going to leave all of those checked, and we're going to hit OK. So now you can see we're starting to get somewhere. We can see that we have each item's auto increment ID, which is a unique number ID for each item. We have the created at date, the created by date, and many other kind of metadata fields like the name, the status, and when it was updated at and who it was updated by. The meat of our data exists in this fields column, and you'll see that now I need to expand once more to start to see data in these fields. So I'm going to click under fields, I'm going to click expand again. You can see it's going to load all of my column names. These are kind of the custom fields that exist for my category. I'm going to hit OK, and you'll see that I now have a column for each field listed here. So you can see, like, if we go to the description field, for example, you can see all of the descriptions for each one of my issues. But if I go back to some of these others, let's go to status, for example, you can see I need to boil this down a little bit further because I still just have a list of these items. So I'm going to click on status. I'm going to expand this again. And in this case, I'm going to extract the values. And once I do that, you can see that now it's actually pulling the status out of each one of these items, and I can view them here. We can treat these other columns in the same way, and you'll notice that all of these steps that I'm taking are automatically applied to the data every time I bring new data in. So in order to refresh my data, all I have to do is click here, and it'll refresh the data and apply these steps in the exact same way. Let's bring this into Power BI though and actually make a chart from this information. So now that I'm done with transforming my data for now in Power Query Editor, and I'm going to hit close and apply. And now you can see it'll call that query, apply those steps, and bring my data into a Power BI. So what we're going to do is we're going to build just a simple donut chart to show the overall statuses of the items in my project. So I'm going to click on donut. And then for the items that I'm going to include, I'm going to open up the data from my elements call. And we're going to use this status field in my donut chart. So I've just added it to legends. I also want to add this to values. And you can see now I have a donut chart that is broken down by status and displays it in a donut chart. The last thing let's do, let's go ahead and modify the data and make sure that it's coming back in a way that we would expect. Okay, so back in my API example project, I'm going to create two new issues. The first one is going to be issue 9. I'm going to set a status of open, and I'm going to create another issue here, which is going to be issue 10, and we'll set this to completed. All right, so I've modified the data in this project. Let's go back to Power BI and refresh our data source. So in Power BI, in order to get this new data into my project, all I have to do is click here to refresh our data queries. So when I hit refresh, it's going to pull in all of the data. You can see it loaded 10 rows this time instead of 8. And you can see that it's reflected now in my chart that I have 3 completed instead of 2. and a total of 2 open instead of 1. And obviously, as we make changes to those items in layer, all I have to do is hit refresh and it's going to bring the data in the exact same way. All right, so hopefully that gives you a good idea of how you can start to use layer data and sync it to Power BI to create powerful dashboards for your team as you work. So thank you for taking the time to watch this.